Before we get to the video, check out my Patreon linked in the description of this video, where for $5 a month you get exclusive content such as sneak peeks at projects like upcoming videos, dioramas, stop motions, photography. You'll get a shout out in videos like this one. I also take video requests. You can see behind the scenes of my stop motions in toy photography, as well as exclusive stop motions in photography. Again, you get all these perks on my Patreon for $5 a month. Link to join in the description of this video. Now let's get to it. Alrighty, you guys, so thank you for clicking on this video. As you can tell by the title, sort of a JaAm classic here on the channel, a topic that may be controversial, but just something kind of interesting to talk about if you're a hardcore Transformers fan like me. But the franchise basically has no source material. I'm going to get into this as swiftly as possible and explain myself to the best of my ability. I may be off on some things, or I may be missing some points that I would like to point out in this video, but I somehow forget or I don't articulate correctly. But I'm going to try my best, and I know for a fact I'm not the only person in the fandom that feels this way, because I'm going to read some examples from people who posted on the TFW boards a few weeks ago that really inspired me to do this video when I was reading these comments. So this first person here is from the Soundwave on the TFW boards. It's a bit of a lengthy little write-up here, but he says, "The thing is, all the arguments about source material and comparisons to superhero movies are a bit flimsy. It's honestly debatable whether stuff like Sunbow and G1 Marvel even count as a source material. People tend to forget that the true source material for Transformers is the toys that originally had no character or lore, and are simply enough to be open to interpretation. Even the Sunbow drawings aren't strict adaptations of the toy designs. I kind of feel like Sunbow and Marvel should be viewed as early adaptations of Transformers, not the source material. Whereas characters like Spider-Man and Batman spring from the mind of a creator and have remained more or less unchanged since conception. Sure, very early Batman killed, but the character as we know him was codified pretty early on. Whereas Transformers characters and lore have still never been fully codified. There have been loose attempts with stuff like Aligned and Evergreen, but Hasbro still allows reinventions like Bull Megatron and Aircraft Mirage. Said it in another thread recently, but I don't think there's a universally right or wrong way to adapt stuff. There's no golden rule carved into a sacred mountain saying all franchises have to be faithful to the original incarnation. Fans don't get to determine how a story should be adapted based on their personal whims. Clearly, Marvel and DC prioritize fidelity to the source material, whereas Hasbro is okay being more experimental with Transformers. Nothing wrong with each franchise taking a different approach based on what works for them. I think fans also forget that Hasbro is not only okay with people like Bay making drastic changes, but actively contributes to it. Name slaps are done for the sake of holding onto trademarks and have been a thing since before the movies. Characters like Blitzwing and Battletrap being so far removed from the G1 version isn't those darn filmmakers betraying the classics." And I screenshotted this weeks ago, and it cuts off where he continued to write stuff, but you basically get the gist. I didn't screenshot the full thing, unfortunately, but that's basically what he was saying. And there was another excerpt here from somebody commenting similar sentiments. So this is from Chris R291 on the boards. "I don't want my children beholden to the designs of my childhood. If redesigning the cast helps attract the new generation of fans to keep the franchise alive, I think it makes sense. Sure, some characters like Prime have specific traits that make them recognizable, but it's not the end of the world if the characters are refreshed. Besides, regardless of the generation you joined this fandom, those designs and the media associated with those characters are still available. If you don't like the new designs, go watch the old show. Just because a specific generation did well doesn't mean it should dominate the entire franchise's existence." So, this is basically points that I've been making on the channel for the last couple years now, since I first started. And this is points that hundreds of thousands, if not millions of fans over the years have been making points about in the fandom. And, you know, I agree with what these guys are saying here. And this is coming from fans that seem to be older, you know, in their 40s or 50s even. I don't want to assume their ages, but that's what I'm getting from, you know, what they're saying here. And, you know, this is from G1ers, basically, you know, from that era. It really puts it into perspective that this is not just a young generation problem, like you guys don't respect G1 or you guys want to ignore quote unquote source material. I'm sure there's some younger fans out there who are being a bit too ignorant, sure. But, you know, this is a topic that is as old as time, it feels like, within the Transformers fandom. It's started ever since Beast Wars. Source material, source material, source material. And, you know, these guys kind of put it into a good perspective here. There really isn't a source material in a franchise called Transformers. This is not Marvel, Star Wars, or DC where there's a set sort of vision for literally everything laid out. Transformers is different universes, different cartoons. It's more than just keeping fundamental lore. It's about building on top of it and moving forward and going with the times and going with what pop culture and the current generation of kids want to see. And I feel like Hasbro Transformers in the modern times have kind of lost that sentiment a little bit, and have just basically gone nostalgia bait or just retro with a lot of things when they really don't need to, when that is not really the main draw of Transformers. The main draw of Transformers is not just G1. The main draw of this franchise is the fact that they're alien robots at war that can transform into basically anything. Keyword, basically anything. Hone into that, Hasbro. We need more of, you know, them transforming into basically anything. You know, people loved alternators. People loved Unicron Trilogy. You know, in terms of looking back on it, people love G2 now because it's something wacky and different that you don't get nowadays. I bet you if G2 came out now with a cartoon, lore, comics, and a new toy line on the level of Generations, people would be buying that stuff off the shelves like hotcakes because that is what the fandom is craving nowadays. It definitely wasn't craving it back in the 90s when it was new and fresh, and it was more so, you know, dominated by Ninja Turtles and Power Rangers and just the nostalgia of G1 kind of back then. But this is what the fandom kind of wants now. They want the wacky stuff. They want our characters getting reinvented in a way that doesn't necessarily lose who they are in terms of the A-listers like Optimus and Megatron, but reinventing them to a way that makes them fresh and interesting, where you could actually sit down and be like, okay, I could stomach another retelling of Transformers from beginning to end in terms of a storyline with these same characters. I think that's where Hasbro's kind of lost the sauce here. You know, you look at things like Unicron Trilogy, Animated, Prime, they're completely different universes, completely different art styles, and somehow they still have a similarity between them in terms of the main goal of the Autobots and Decepticons, the main gist of the A-list characters, keyword A-list. I'm not talking about B, C, D-listers, because, I mean, honestly, their identities can be changed more so than A-listers, because, you know, the A-listers like Optimus, Bumblebee, Megatron, Starscream, they're the face of the franchise, you know. They have to have the similar design traits every iteration. They have to have similar character traits every different iteration. That's just how it is. And, you know, but they also change each iteration in a way that fits to what story and what lore they're trying to tell in that version of Transformers. And, you know, Hasbro still does that to an extent, but it's not nearly as outside the box, creative, or interesting as it was in the early 2010s or the 2000s or the 90s. I think Hasbro needs to get hungry again. Something really needs to shake up Transformers to kind of bring it back into that big limelight. I mean, Skybound isn't the most perfect example because it's basically just a rehash of G1, but it's modernized, it's gritty. It really takes these characters to a new realm in terms of this real world heaviness to it. You know, something like that at least would really bring people back into Transformers, you know, like an Invincible level cartoon, which is rumored, by the way. So hopefully Hasbro hones into this and delivers on this rumored adult-based cartoon from the Skybound comics. And, you know, just remember, Hasbro, if somebody working there happens to be watching this video, I highly doubt it, but you never know. Look at these guys who seem to be people who are probably in their 40s or something that grew up on G1 or B or maybe even B stores, you never know, 40s or 50s. They're saying that you don't have to be beholden to G1 because Transformers is in a different zeitgeist than Marvel, DC, or Star Wars. There's nothing truly set to these characters because the freaking thing is called Transformers. They're meant to change and evolve. So, keeping the core stuff of the storylines and some of the A-list characters that are the face of the franchise, yes, nobody is arguing that. But also switch it up a bit. Make it something fresh, cool, new, interesting. And Hasbro is failing to do that. And a lot of people in the fandom are failing to realize this at this point in time nowadays, unfortunately, which is why you have this nostalgia bait going on where Hasbro feels like they need to do more G1 to make some money. And that's just simply not the case. But I don't know, it just feels like kind of a mess right now. Hopefully the lore, the media, and Hasbro really find their footing in terms of making new, interesting Transformers content again. But hopefully that's the case with this Skybound adult-based cartoon that's rumored. Hopefully it's like an Invincible style and it really brings people back into the franchise. I mean, Transformers is still massive, don't get me wrong, but it feels like it's kind of fading away a bit into something that's kind of just coasting along in pop culture. It's not really moving the needle like it once was during the 2000s or the 2010s, unfortunately. But yeah, guys, let me know down below how do y'all feel about this topic of Transformers not necessarily having source material in the traditional sense, like, say, a Marvel or a DC or Star Wars. But yeah, thank y'all for watching this video. Catch you guys in the next one. Bye!